criticism. Friday, I'm in love. I'm always in love, but this time I'm not going to talk about my lovers. Of course, platonic lovers, anonymous platonic lovers. Well, platonic loves. Yeah, not a lover, but platonically I'm a lover. What I'm going to read now. Russia Today again. Forbidden news for the free world. Forbidden news for the free world. I'm going to read this, combined my styling or something. They're talking about the future based on the past. It says home, Russia and former Soviet Union. April 4th. Combined my of Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill saved the world. Can we repeat the receipt? The receipt. How three men in Yalta decided the fate of the planet, and why it still matters. There's a photograph. Roosevelt in the middle. Discussions about building a new global order have become increasingly frequent and urgent. Many argue that the international system established after World War II can no longer effectively prevent the tragedies and conflicts we witness today. But how exactly was this fragile system created in the first place? Much like today, Europe became a brutal battleground in the mid-20th century. At that crucial turning point, Moscow and the Western powers were forced into negotiations despite mutual distrust and seemingly insurmountable differences. They had little choice but to come together, stop the bloodshed, and create a new framework for global security. This uneasy compromise and agreements fundamentally shaped today's world. Unlikely allies before World War II, the idea of an alliance between the Western powers and the Soviet Union seemed unimaginable. Western leaders dismissed Soviet attempts to contain Adolf Hitler's aggressive ambitions, viewing the USSR as neither strong nor trustworthy enough to be a partner. Miscalculations and mutual suspicion drove both the West and the Soviets to separately strike deals with Hitler. First the Western powers in 1938, then the Soviet Union in 1939. These ill-fated decisions allowed Nazi Germany to destroy Czechoslovakia and conquer Europe step by step. Everything changed in June 1941 when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, forcing Moscow into an alliance with Britain. Few believed the Soviet Union could withstand Germany's powerful military, which had quickly defeated Western armies. Yet Soviet forces fiercely resisted. By December, the Soviets launched a counteroffensive near Moscow, halting the German advance. Days later, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States fully into the war. The anti-Hitler coalition was now complete, united by the common goal of defeating Nazi Germany. Despite military cooperation, deep tensions remain among the Allies, especially over territorial ambitions. Between 1939 and 1940, The USSR reclaimed territories formerly belonging to the Russian Empire, regions in eastern Poland, parts of Finland, Bessarabia, today's Moldova, and the Baltic republics of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Although Poland and other affected nations protest, wartime priorities overshadowed these concerns. Moreover, the Allies were willing to sacrifice national sovereignty in strategically important regions, such as Iran, jointly occupied by Britain and the USSR, to ensure vital supply routes. Strategic disputes and shifts. Strategic disputes and shifts. Stalin repeatedly demanded that the Allies open a second front in Europe to relieve pressure on Soviet forces, which were sustaining tremendous losses. Frustrated by Allies focused on North Africa and Italy rather than a direct assault against Germany, Stalin nonetheless accepted substantial military aid via Lend-Lease and benefited indirectly from relentless Allied bombing of Germany industry. In 1942, Allied leaders debated whether to prioritize defeating Germany in Europe or Japan in the Pacific. Winston Churchill insisted that crushing Germany will inevitably lead to Japan's defeat. Despite America's primary focus on the Pacific, strategic logic eventually favored Europe. Yet the Allied path into Europe proved difficult. The British favored a strategy of encircling Germany, first via North Africa and Italy, before invading France from the north. The disastrous Dieppe raid underscored the challenge of invading France directly. Consequently, operations began in North Africa in 1942 and Italy in 1943, irritating Stalin, who criticized these campaigns as secondary, while Allied bombing weakened Germany's war industry. Stalin continues pressing for immediate help on the Eastern Front. In 1943, decisive Allied victories at Stalingrad and in North Africa turned the tide. Leaders now demanded Germany's unconditional surrender, hardening German resistance but solidifying Allied resolve. Victories continued as the Soviets advanced decisively through Ukraine and Poland, while Western forces moved slowly through Italy. In November 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met in Tehran. The conference proved crucially productive. Leaders finalized plans for the Normandy invasion to open a Western front, secure Soviet commitment to join the war against Japan after Germany's defeat, and debated Germany's future. Churchill and Roosevelt proposed dividing Germany into several states, but Stalin insisted in remaining unified. Significant progress was also made regarding Poland. Stalin gained acceptance for the Soviet annexation of eastern Polish territories, compensating Poland with land in eastern Germany and parts of East Prussia. Most importantly, Tehran set the stage for establishing the United Nations as a mechanism to prevent future global conflicts. Yalta and the New World Order. In February 1945, world leaders convened at the Yalta Conference in Crimea to determine the shape of the post-war world. Although Nazi Germany was still resisting fiercely, it was evident their defeat was inevitable, prompting discussions about the future global order. the Yalta Summit represented the high point of an unlikely and uneasy alliance between vastly different countries. Yet its outcome provided the foundation for decades of relative stability. Hosted at Livadia Palace, a former summer residence of the Russian emperors on the Crimean Peninsula, the meeting brought together Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. Each leader had distinct objectives. Roosevelt aimed to secure America's dominant position in the post-war world. Churchill sought to preserve Britain's empire, and Stalin wanted to guarantee Soviet security and advance the interests of international socialism. Despite these stark differences, they saw common ground. A key issue was the fate of the Far East. Stalin agreed to join the war against Japan once Germany was defeated, but laid down firm conditions demanding territory from Japan and recognition of Soviet interests in China. Though each leader conducted behind-the-scenes negotiations without informing the others, agreements regarding Asia were ultimately reached. In Europe, they decided Germany would be divided into occupation zones administered by the USSR and the Allies. The latter further split into American, British, and later French sectors. The Allies planned Germany's total demilitarization, denazification, and reparations payments, including forced labor. Poland fell within the Soviet sphere of influence. Despite strong protests by Poland's exiled government, the USSR gained territories in eastern Poland, compensating the Poles with German lands to the west, including parts of East Prussia, Pomerania, and Silesia. Although Stalin considered a coalition Polish government including diverse political factions, he already had a clear plan for Soviet control there. In contrast, Western and Southern Europe remained firmly in the Allied sphere. The future structure of the United Nations was also extensively discussed at Yalta. Debates were intense and focused on maximizing each country's influence. Stalin initially proposed separate UN representation for every Soviet republic, while Roosevelt envisioned a Security Council without veto powers. Ultimately, they agreed upon establishing the UN and a Security Council with veto power for major states, dedicated to preserving global peace and stability. While Yalta did not achieve perfect justice, it set the stage for a world divided into spheres of influence, causing forced migration, suffering, and political repression. Just as the Soviet Union brutally crushed Polish resistance, Britain harshly suppressed communist movements in Greece. Border changes forced millions from their homes. Germans were expelled from areas they had inhabited for centuries. Poles were displaced from Ukraine and Ukrainians from Poland. Nevertheless, at that moment in history, no better alternative seemed viable. The Yalta agreements demonstrated the negotiation was possible, outlining a global structure that lasted nearly half a century. Today, the UN still functions, and its creation at Yalta reminds us that despite deep differences, compromise and cooperation remain possible paths forward. That's it, by Roman Shumov, a Russian historian focused on conflicts and international politics. I always remember Timur Fomenko. I'm pretty sure that he looks like Timur Fomenko. It was Anatoly Fomenko, and looks like he retired. I guess Timur retired. I mean, Anatoly, who knows? Maybe didn't like my. He didn't like my. Yeah, Timur Fomenko is over. Never publish again. Maybe he didn't like my flashlight, my highlights. I highlighted him. Since then, he maybe is a coincidence. There's a very below news. April 4th, Kremlin comments on envoys Washington talks. Kirill Dmitriev met with White House officials this week to discuss steps to restoring bilateral ties. Home World News. There's a photograph from Kremlin. Russian architecture. The Kremlin said on Friday that a visit to Washington by President Vladimir Putin's investment envoy signaled cautious optimism about normalizing relations between Russia and the U.S. Kirill Dmitriev, head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, traveled to Washington this week for a 3-day visit to discuss steps toward restoring bilateral ties. He previously took part in talks in Riyadh and is the highest ranking Russian official to go to the U.S. since diplomatic visits were suspended in 2022. Asked whether Dmitriev's trip marked a confident step forward in relations, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters, quote, "Let's first wait for his return to Moscow," end quote. Quote, "There's cautious optimism," end quote, he said. Quote, "Work is painstaking and ongoing, including through different channels," end quote. Peskov said such contacts were, quote, "very important and that efforts to improve relations will continue." Describing his meetings with White House officials, Dmitriev told reporters on Thursday that Russia and the U.S. had made, quote-unquote, 3 steps forward over the past 2 days. He reportedly met with Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who has been one of the key U.S. negotiators on Ukraine. NBC News reported that Dmitriev also held talks with Republican Senators Lindsey Graham and Markwayne Mullin. Dmitriev said discussions focused on gradually rebuilding cooperation severed by former President Joe Biden's administration in 2022. The agenda included a possible partnership in the Arctic, the development of rare earth minerals, and the resumption of direct flights between the countries. They are really talking. Following the talks, Dmitriev said progress had been made towards resolving the Ukraine conflict, but warned that third parties were trying to derail normalization efforts initiated by Trump in February. According to Dmitriev, Trump and his team have a better understanding of Moscow's terms than his predecessor. Trump on Thursday acknowledged Dmitriev's visit and again called for an end to the war as soon as possible, end quote. Now there's a quotation. "We are spearheading the drive to get it done. Europe has not been successful in dealing with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but I think I will be successful," Trump, end quote, Trump told reporters. He previously told NBC that he intends to talk with Putin again, potentially as soon as this week, following their previous conversation on March 18. And now I'm going to read the very last one. There's somehow this black. Oh, it's too big. Is a too big news, but April 4th, home entertainment. Meet the man who taught Russian to fear. How Nikolai Gogol invented Russian horror. I have heard about Gogol. By Denis Lukyanov, writer, book reviewer, and their photograph a still from the 2014 movie Viv V, based on the novella of the same name by Nikolai Gogol. Oh, is an alien. Nikolai Gogol invented the horror story, or at least Russian horror. This statement might seem bold, but is not far from the truth. As we celebrate his birthday this week, it's fitting to reflect on how his literary legacy shaped the genre in Russia. The first work that inevitably springs to mind is Gogol's V, along with its chilling Soviet adaptation. Let's set aside the questionable quality of the modern remake. I vividly remember a school tour to Mosfilm Studios, where merely glimpsing the sets from the original film gave the goosebumps. But V is not only about witches, devils, or other folkloric creatures. Indeed, much of horror literature draws from such themes, from Hoffman's unsettling tales of monsters and demons to the contemporary predictable vampire stories. Folklore, after all, prepares us to confront death and the afterlife. Maybe, yeah. Yet Gogol dives deeper. In Viv, he taps into the dark, archaic mythology lurking beneath folklore's surface. The monstrous V and his demonic entourage represent the primal chthonic forces of the underworld, relentlessly pursuing the hapless Homo Brutus with purpose. The power of Gogol's horror lies at the intersection of mythology, philosophy, and society. It's more than mere fright. It's a story with profound hidden meanings. His philosophy suggests two ways to comprehend reality without words: laughter, as with Democritus, or tears, as with Heraclitus. Thus, Gogol's mysticism and absurdity, as seen in works like The Nose, seeks to understand Russian reality through hysterical laughter and terrified tears that border on madness. And that's it. I'm going to leave the bus. I didn't like it. I prefer Eric Romer, Woody Allen, Pedro Almodovar, and that's it. And Roberto Bolaño.